Good afternoon, welcome to West London Business's spring property lunch. An afternoon where we're going to focus on the themes of CleanTech and sustainable construction in West London. For those of you that have been guests at our property lunches for many years, you'll know that they've been going for over a decade and they're always a social affair. So you won't be surprised that I have a bottle of my favourite London Pride. Unfortunately, a bottle that I'm not going to be allowed to open until later this afternoon, but it's there ready to go, and I may be tucking into my lunch as this afternoon's programme continues. But against this backdrop of this extraordinary coronavirus pandemic that is changing all of our lives, I think for us it's been relatively easy to move the property lunch online. We are hugely conscious in the wider construction sector of the pressure that so many colleagues are under as you deliberate whether you can keep construction sites going or whether they need to be closed down entirely. And we've noted, as we've looked at the advice that's been coming out, the fantastic work done by the Construction Leadership Council to try and provide more practical advice on how to navigate these challenges. Today, I hope will provide a pleasant distraction from the pandemic, at least for the next hour, and it's a content-rich hour ahead with an expert panel made up of Nick Belsten, London Director at WSP Indigo, Paul Vick, who's the founder of Vic Architects, and we should also be joined during the hour. I'm looking out the corner of my eye to see when the connection is made by Councillor Peter Mason, who's the Cabinet Member for Housing, Planning and Transformation at London Borough of Ealing. We had apologies from Dr. Deborah Pullen, the Executive Director of the BRE Trust, because unfortunately in her part of the country the broadband investment just isn't quite there yet, and we couldn't get a reliable enough link. Now, my colleague Pim is going to be monitoring our live YouTube feed throughout the next hour, looking for your questions to come through, so don't be shy. Any question goes. And I know that the WRB team has matched up a number of you for one-to-ones via Skype as we replace face-to-face networking. So if you haven't yet been in touch and had a chance to review the delegates list, do get in touch with the team over the next hour, or indeed over the next 24 hours, and we'll be doing our best to set up calls to be scheduled after the programme. Now, I must also, of course, thank our sponsors and supporters of today's programme and Property Lunch, WSP, but also Better Futures, the CleanTech support programme for London's SMEs, which is funded in turn by the GLA and the European Union. Now, our themes for this morning, we are going to start with a bit of an overview of our panellists' take on sustainable construction in West London. We'll then move on to design and planning. We're going to kind of look sort of fairly sequentially through the construction cycle, and then also sort of reflect at the end of the programme on sort of post-occupancy energy challenges and some of the opportunities that may exist there. And of course, throughout the hour, we've got a number of short video interviews that I've been able to have over the past week with the team at Better Futures and Sustainable Workspaces. We're hearing from Leanne, and then some of our great CleanTech startups that have been developing over the past few years at some points in their journey with support from the Better Futures programme. So we'll be hearing their stories as well during the next hour. But to kick us off, I'm going to turn to Nick Belsten, London Director at WSP Indigo, for Nick's take on how this sustainable construction, green construction, whatever you want to call it, landscape has changed in recent times, and what it means for you, Nick. I'm not hearing Nick. Hope others are. Nick, We're not getting your audio. let's try again. Nick, you're with us, I think now. Right, back to Nick with his audio on.
I've just said I've locked the kids up, so there will be hopefully none of them running behind me whilst we're doing this chat. But they might come in screaming, having a fight. But in terms of the sustainability sort of agenda, obviously it's changing on a daily basis. Technology is improving, but clearly with the climate emergency, there is significant emphasis in terms of how the development industry will now need to meet and improve in terms of sustainability. I think that the government have committed, obviously, to some very quite rigorous standards, and policy requirement is going to be absolutely right. But ultimately, over the next decades, we're going to have to respond, and we're going to have to bring everyone together and work collaboratively. I think that technology is moving fast, but at a cost, and we have to balance this with everything else in the development industry, particularly with the house building crisis at the moment. There's an issue that costs will rise, and how that impacts. There is a clear agenda. There is an expectation that new development will absolutely need to be as sustainable and energy proficient as possible. But working at the moment, I mean, certainly WSP, they have a full range of services ready. And ultimately, we're working with our clients to inform them of the issues and really get them in a position so that they are aware of the challenges that they need to face and solve, which we're working with them to resolve to meet that challenge.
And with 2030 being, I think, front of mind for many people as a key target for carbon neutrality, do you think that's focusing your clients' minds?
And I think it's also, I mean, what we're finding is it's also where we're looking at occupiers. There is a changing view that occupiers and future, that they will be expecting they occupy to meet these standards. And it's an increasingly important requirement. Clients are, I think in the past, they've sort of taken it seriously, but now it's a point where they're going to have to, it's not a case of committing to it, that they've, and perhaps not delivering in a sort of, it is absolutely on the agenda.
Well, thank you, Nick, for that overview. I think we're going to turn now to Paul Vick. Paul is a chartered RIBA architect, founder of Vic Architects, and also a fellow of the RSA. He trained at Cambridge and then worked internationally, setting up his own practice 14 years ago, and worked on one project over the past few years that was a zero carbon 8,000 home development in London. So really the sort of scale that I think we're all now aspiring to, and has a very long experience in the regeneration and sustainability space. His practice is based in Chiswick, West London, and is multiple award-winning, most innovative architecture firm, London 2018 and 19, and many more awards to boot. But their particular approach brings a focus on securing 100% planning permission for new and listed buildings. So looking forward very much to hearing what Paul has to say.
Thank you, and good afternoon. And I'm really pleased we can get together in this environment. We've got a couple of slides I thought it might be worth just running through, if we're able to bring those up. We have a particular approach, a multiple approach, if you like, to why you would do a project, and I've run through them there on the screen. You have a use value, the greater efficiency of operations, your home, is it a home? The economic one, which is measurable in terms of capital, rental, footfall, retailing, all have slightly different metrics. There's obviously the social side, whether that's a team effort and working together, the increasing network like what we're doing today, or community. At the same time, there's the environmental one, and that has, again, very many metrics, which we can talk about later if necessary, including lower carbon, but also a longer lasting environment, inherent energy use, reduced sick days, and is it healthier? Does it help us live longer? I mean, these are fundamental things that we can start to enjoy, engage with architecturally. And then there's an identity value. In the commercial world, that might be one of brand, but also I think it's a conceptual idea of where you are, what the world has been calling recently, sort of this notion of place, but I think it's more than that. And that comes on to the next thing, really. Through identity, we talk about our belonging, what sort of constituency are we a part of, and what do we subscribe to and want to be seen as being subscribing to. And then lastly, this cultural one, I believe, is everywhere. This sort of group notion of how we're linked together. So if you bring all those together, one by one, that's very useful and interesting. But actually, at an economic level, and this is one of the things that I think people have been struggling with, is how do you pay for this, is that actually they help each other. And over the long term, you find that the environmental, which is coming, and as Nick was saying, it's being forced on us as well now. It's carrot and stick. The planning requirements require it, but also as they change over a longer time period, the notion of our capital value of a building actually reduces. So if you can have a building last longer, actually over 2 generations, it'll be much cheaper, and I think that's the sort of longevity that we need to be talking about to make it really stack up. And when you talk to people who they want to sell a large development to, it might be a pension fund. So of course, that sort of longevity fits very well. So that's that first slide. If we could look at the next one. Can we just go on to the next slide? Is that possible? Yeah. So one example of things I've been involved in, this was the British Museum master plan for the next 50 to 100 years. It's a cultural icon. It's very much about how do you create somewhere where people can have a dialogue and have things that are in common and create influence. If we look at the next one. Should we look at the next slide? Yeah, this is the 8,000 home zero carbon development I drafted for Berkeley Homes, must have been about 16, 17 years ago now, which has turned into Manor House. So even then the technology was possible. It's the question of how we harness it and move it forward, and in particular in relation to infrastructure. And we'll come back to that. Now, here we are, several sort of times later. Should we move on to the next slide? These are a couple of towers we've been looking at. So one on the left would have been a new build pin tower. The one on the right is actually started as 4 stories and was a change of use to create, 10 stories for homes facing south, facing the Thames, and with light and this respect in an urban area of how do you do that. Next. So this project we looked at, and I'll do this very briefly to give you an idea how we built it up from the granular level, was a house for a private couple. It's a first age to third age house. How does you help people live longer? The care community told us that if you could allow people to stay in a home for a longer period of time, it would assist them in living longer. So that question of if you can create a building that helps you live longer, I mean, what is that worth to people individually and as a society? It's out there for us to really work with that. So in this house, and it was designed to a low energy passive house standard. So north is to the top. The elements that we see there are smaller windows on the north, cellularity to the top of the page as well, which sort of provide a thermal buffer. Within that cellularity, more thermal sort of units and cells. And then to the south side, looking east and west. I haven't quite got to that one. East and west was looking through to the garden on both sides. So there's a sense of space and light and engagement with the landscape, but at the same time, actually, it was a very small footprint. And it allows for carers to come in the future, and of course, design aspects of how could you convert it to take wheelchairs and the like without it looking medicalized or feeling like that. It was their home, their belonging. Should we go next? And this was it from the front. It was private, very low at the front, and opens up very much so on the other side. I'm not sure if we have a slide of the other side as well. Do you have the next slide? Okay, so all right, so we moved on here then to another project that we've been working on. This is a 22-acre site, and it's a regeneration project. The Grand Canal went through the middle, and we've used the units on the left for these low energy houses and a care home as well at the far end for 8. So we're working the independent units to work with a care home. But then on the right hand side, we have a series of new low energy homes, as well as conversion of the old buildings. And I can talk more about that later. Next. These are some of the amazing buildings that would be phased. We've already created retail and fast broadband offices here, and the last phase would be a boutique hotel, which might happen in 10 years, 20 years. This is how they then phase the economics of it as they fill them up with people within it. Next. And there's a detail on the left of how the care home works, and there's a particular format for different sizes of garden, different outlooks, larger communal spaces, more private spaces, as well as how do you make circulation work within a building and outside of it, and mix it with uses that can be used in the community as well as for a particular use. Next. Yeah, and finally, yeah, the message here is that it's very reflexive architecture. What we do with it will influence us profoundly, and it's possible. It's a question of political will and how we go about doing that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Paul, for that splendid sort of overview and some really inspirational projects that you've brought to our attention there. I was very struck by the fact that this isn't really something new. You've been clearly working on projects for over 15 years in this vein. It really is how we scale it up and ensure that everyone has the same ambition. So to kind of pick up on the point that you flagged of political will, it seems appropriate now that I bring in Councillor Peter Mason, who's Cabinet Member for Housing, Planning and Transformation at London Borough of Ealing, to give his sort of take on the landscape that we're now facing in terms of clean tech and sustainable green construction. What's your thoughts, Peter?
Hi. So I think, look, we've got to look at some of the broader pictures in terms of the political culture and the environment that we're now living in. I think we are going through a period, partly as a consequence of globalization and some really big topics, whereby people's sense of power and control over the things that impact their lives are not within their grasp in a way that they would have been 20, 30, 40 years ago. And as we increasingly feel the contexts and the impacts of things like globalization, globalized labor, globalized capital, people have greater expectations that government are able to control and direct and mitigate the things that they can't do themselves. So in the context of sustainability, we have particularly in London, and let's face it, that's where we are, we have some quite conflicting messages about sustainability and sustainable growth that don't seem to be consistent. So on the one hand, we have a genuinely affordable homes crisis in which we have flexible policies that enable us to build at scale and at pace, but increasingly because of the constraint on the green belt and the release of metropolitan open land and the availability of brownfield, we're seeing concrete towers appear in the sky, and that doesn't seem to feel to people as if it's particularly sustainable. Now, I take quite a radical view about sustainable growth in London. I don't necessarily think it's achievable, and there's probably a conversation that London needs to have about its own contribution to the levelling up agenda. And I say that as a Labour politician. This is not just a challenge that some of the biggest impacts that London faces are a consequence of its own success. Taking the collective appetite for infrastructure investment, which no doubt sends land value up, which therefore creates even bigger challenges around viability, that then put, unfortunately, a financial mechanism into a series of inputs and considerations that a planning system isn't well designed to be able to handle. So, we can talk about sustainability, and we can talk about zero carbon, biodiversity, urban greening, food growth, air quality, waste reduction, recycling, aggregates. All of these things we can consider in the context of the need to build sustainably and have sustainable plans and a sustainable planning architecture. But so long as we consider those things to be in competition with the need to tackle a genuinely affordable housing crisis, or to be able to secure the investment in infrastructure that's required to support that kind of sustained, probably not sustainable growth, then we have a challenge. Now, as a local authority, our priority is about building genuinely affordable homes, and we've got mechanisms and devices that we're doing that through through our inbuilt housing company, Broadway Living, stripping effectively out the profit margin that traditional developers would otherwise seek, to be able to take that 22.5% and put it into other considerations, like, for example, healthy home standards. And sustainable homes, and we'll be looking at doing, for example, a design guide in the coming months. Obviously, those plans are somewhat up in air given the current situation, but they're as important to our resilience and our recovery from coronavirus as anything else. But really looking at how we can lead the market and direct it in terms of where we want to go. But of course, all of that takes place within a period of big uncertainty, I think, for the planning world, given the moves that the government are talking about in terms of planning system reform, and we obviously have to watch how that develops. The idea that we can build beautiful homes and fast track them is all very well and good, but we need to see kind of more detail on that. But ultimately, we have a role as a local authority. So when we review our local plan, we'll be mirroring what's said in the London plan, and we will have high expectations.
Multiple sustainability challenges for us to be grappling with there, and I think lots of threads that I'm sure those viewing the webcast are going to want to come back to us on, and you particularly Peter, through the live questions sort of feed. I'm always struck, when we discuss the sustainability of London as a city, that when you look through an ecological footprint lens, the general reckoning is that we need 3 planets, not 1, to support the lives of Londoners and the sheer volume of resource that we consume. Now, I'm going to turn to our first video tape this morning, an interview that I was able to do a bit earlier this week with Leanne Perkins from Better Futures and Sustainable Ventures, our partners today. And I think Leanne's going to give us a little bit of a flavour of what they're up to with some of the startup companies.
Expertise across the Sustainable Ventures team.
And then, from what I understand, Leanne, it's also possible to pull in the expertise of academics from Imperial College London.
Yes, absolutely. That's a major part of the program, is the academic partnership with Imperial College, and they are able to offer several different things to our startups. One is what we call an innovation voucher, and that's expertise from their faculty on a project, a consultancy project, or they can offer an intern from within their student base to help startups with different projects that they are tackling.
So a phenomenal, some might even say world-class offer that's been put together there to support CleanTech startups and SMEs in the capital. And I know there are some pretty awesome businesses that have been onboarded to the Better Futures program and are now starting to take products to market. I wonder whether you can tell us a little bit more, Leanne, about some of those businesses.
Yes, absolutely. We've had a great range of companies that have come through the program that have some pretty amazing ideas. And in the built environment, that's no exception. So for instance, we've had a company called Biome come through the program, and Biome are developing completely natural, intelligent, and multitasking materials to replace those that are currently used in construction. Obviously with an aim for a healthier and more sustainable future. Now we also have a company called PowerVault, and they have developed an in-home battery storage system for homes that have solar, rooftop solar in their homes. They've grown this offering over the course of the last couple of years, and are now integrating with smart home devices so that people can use the energy that they have in their home more efficiently and at lower cost. We also have AirX, is a company that offers smart ventilation through smart air bricks in the home to reduce humidity and also to reduce heat loss and improve comfort. And all of that is done without compromising air quality in the home. Yes, well...
So that was Leanne Perkins of Better Futures and Sustainable Ventures, a programme that's delivered in partnership with Imperial College London, City Hall, as well as West London Business, and provides a really solid package of support for SMEs that are developing new clean tech products and services. And we're going to hear a bit more of the detail behind some of those startups that Leanne mentioned in that videotape later on in the programme. But I think I'd like to turn back to Paul now. I know from our conversations over the years your particular passion for a standard called Passivhaus. I wonder whether you can tell us a bit more about that and how that's been informing your approach to sustainable construction, Paul.
Yes, certainly. Yeah, no, we've been following that. There are many standards for the environmental side, whether it is judged as low carbon, energy in use, whether it's inherent life and inherent energy of materials, where they come from, all these sorts of things. I mean, one of the things we sort of looked at and tried to go back to basics was really, if you didn't need to build it, don't build it. It's very simple. It's an economy of means. If you don't need it, don't build it. And and there's then therefore the implication of that perhaps is you could have homes that feel bigger with greater light, greater relationship to the outside, but with a smaller, GIA, gross internal area. So that was our sort of first starting point. And then the next stage really was then, how do you use as little energy as possible when you actually build, rather than jumping into what is often called the gizmos, the energy producing elements. And again, that's quite an easy and cost effective thing to do. You have a lot more insulation in the building, all those sorts of things, and Passivhaus works to that effect. And then the resultant energy need is then picked up by the active measures. And Passivhaus very much promotes that sort of process, really. And there's a lot more technicality to it, but that's the principle of it. And I remember 16 years...
What are the challenges, Paul? Because it all sounds very obvious. Why aren't more people doing it?
Well, that's the question we've been asking for the last 20 years, really. And there's this notion of technology and innovation, if you like, where technology is the lever, if you like, and there is a lot of technology and there has been, but actually innovation is giving value to that technology. It's knowing what to do with it. It's joining the dots, if you like. And the industry has been quite diverse. One of the biggest things that has changed, in my view, is the production of energy and how it's produced. And that infrastructure change to greener solutions, if you like, has been fundamental. And you see that in many countries across the world, where they've changed the way they produce the energy, and that's given off, say, less carbon in the production of it. Less coal burning, for example, might be one example. So I think that's one thing. I think there's been a perception that it's a lot more expensive to do. And sometimes people have said more recently, it might cost us 10 to 15% more to do this. But that, again, is not necessarily the right way of looking at it, because it depends what you're building and how you're building it. If you can cut that out somewhere else, or if you look over a longer value term, if you don't need to rebuild the building every 30 years, then the cost of that is not really there. And there are examples now where it's not really any more expensive, in our view, to do it. So it's very project specific.
So it all sounds possible, and at the interface between, of course, designers, developers, architects, we find WSP and Indigo. Nick, how are you finding the sort of collaboration that's required now between planning teams and local authorities and developers to kind of tease out sometimes some fundamentally new ways of doing things to make clean tech and sustainability happen? Nick? Nick, you're live. Maybe not hearing us. We'll go back to Nick shortly. I'll turn instead to Councillor Peter Mason for your take on that collaboration piece, and where you perhaps see some of the blockages when it comes to green construction actually happening on the ground.
The point here about collaboration is vitally important, but I think it comes again back to that point of inputs. We often, when we have conversations with developers who are considering what they consider to be core business and what are kind of periphery niceties, and often kind of sustainability is kind of categorized in a periphery nicety, as if you somehow can you kind of push the lever on sustainability and therefore you kind of pull the lever off of affordable homes or quality of building materials or space standards. And actually, as already been said, sustainability really now needs to be kind of the central core of, and the central plank of, the way in which building materials, plans, energy is categorized in terms of how you go about design. I'm taken, I have to say, you only have to look at the Matthew Carmona report that was conducted for the campaign to protect rural England that came out a couple of months ago, that talks actually a lot about the fact that these technologies are available, in terms of they are now mainstream, they should be being able to be deployed, but still we're seeing kind of poor design and poor consideration going into quite major schemes. So I think as a planning authority, we have the ability to guide some of that. We have the ability to set standards, and that's what we're doing. But ultimately, it does need developers, and it needs architects, and it needs planning consultants and surveyors and engineers to kind of have these things at the forefront of their mind when they're putting together their proposals.
And I imagine you're not shy, Councillor, to ask challenging questions at committee when needed.
So, I don't go to committee. I have to say, and of course, what the public think about how we engage with developers and how we negotiate with them to get the outcomes that we want often is very different from how they might perceive it on the ground. I've written a lot recently about the way in which actually the planning process doesn't really enable the type of transparent decision making that I think the planning system probably ought to. But yeah, I do tend to find myself in meetings with developers, perhaps having to be a bit more robust than some of my officers, and challenging people a bit more on not viewing things as niceties and thinking about them more as necessities.
Indeed, interesting. Well, let's try again bringing Nick in. Hopefully he can hear me and can share his reflections on that collaboration piece between developers and local authorities. Nick. No, we still don't seem to be having any luck with Nick's connection, so we will go to our next videotape, and that will give you a flavour of a wonderful young company that I was lucky enough to find out more about earlier this week, Qflow, and it was Brittany Harris that I got to have a talk to.
It's great to be here, so thanks for having me. Qflow was founded back in 2018 by myself and my co-founder Jade. So I'm a civil engineer by background, and Jade is an environmental scientist. And we really bonded over our mutual frustration around the long-term impacts of construction and the fact that it could be more sustainable. So we decided to take that on firsthand, use our experience from the industry to try and really change the industry as a whole and make it perform better. So we developed Qflow, which is a tool that enables construction teams and designers to actively track and manage their environmental impact and long-term sustainability, and then use that data and those insights derived to actually improve the long-term performance of all of these developments.
Well, that's an extraordinary challenge you set yourself. So if I'm a user of your tool and I log into the platform, what sort of information and insights get generated, Brittany?
So what Qflow does is it connects to this that captures all the material site and all the waste going off. We also connect to on-site monitors for noise and air quality. And we also draw in external data sets like meteorological data or traffic data to really try and map the external factors that influence the construction activities as well. What we do is we crunch all that data in a machine learning program using various different statistical techniques, and then we draw out the valuable insights and feed them back to the engineering team. So if you're an engineer on site, you don't have to drown in all of that data. You just get the useful bit of information that says either you are or you aren't compliant with waste duty of care or with the project's responsible sourcing requirements for materials. And you'll get an extra bit of information about, and this is the key thing you need to do to make sure that you hit those targets. And here are the opportunities to improve your long-term impact.
Wow, that sounds really neat, and just the sort of gadget I'd love to have on my mobile phone today. How have you seen the sort of impact play out from businesses that have actually started using your tool for the first time?
It's been amazing. So when we first developed Qflow, we were tackling just responsible sourcing of timber. That was the first key problem that we were presented with by Canary Wharf contractors. And we developed the tool to firstly help them really track and make sure that all the timber coming on their site was coming from a responsible source. But the sideline or the unintended benefits that came out of that were really around supply chain performance, enabling greater productivity on site. So we were cutting out a lot of the manual data entry and the manual chasing of the supply chain. But also with all this data, we could identify specifically which suppliers were struggling to meet those requirements. And the more sites that we deploy on, the more we're getting these really interesting insights about the overall performance of the construction project and where there are real opportunities to make not just sustainability gains, but commercial productivity and quality gains by having this kind of data. So the more that we deploy it, the more we're learning about the huge opportunities that exist within this industry. And Canary Wharf contractors are one of the first to really benefit from those insights, and they've been using them to really drive the overall benefits on their construction projects like the Wood Wharf development.
So Canary Wharf are clearly really impressive to have on your client list. Who else are you already working with or hoping to work with in the months ahead? What sorts of businesses make the perfect client for you guys?
So we work with both large contractors, but also developers. So we've been working on HS2 recently with Costain and Skanska, which has been a really exciting project. We're deployed on Old Oak Common to help them capture and track waste and materials coming on and off that site. And it's a real eye-opener and an amazing site to be on. But we've also been working on lots of building developments, so working with people like Sir Robert McAlpine and Multiplex, and really understanding how this data can help them drive towards their wider business objectives as well.
And from what I understand, Brittany, the tool is leveraging the cloud, so folk can log into the data that you're bringing together from everywhere. And we've clearly, as a community, seen that the cloud completely transform so many aspects of built environment working today. What are your sort of reflections on what the cloud has made possible for your business today and could do tomorrow?
It's amazing what can be enabled by using the cloud. In fact, I was having a chat with one of our clients about this the other day, because obviously construction has traditionally not been that digital, but now it's being forced into this cloud environment. And the benefits are massive. It means that a lot of our users that might be quality engine, like project directors and environmental teams, are able to access all of their data on site remotely without having to physically be there and filtering through paper. So being able to use the cloud, and Qflow sits on the cloud, means that they can be managing the impact and performance of their project from anywhere in the world. For us as a small business, it's been absolutely crucial for us to be able to keep developing and keep working together while we have to be remote right now. And actually the fact that we were set up and able to do that right from the beginning has made this transition very, very smooth. I think cloud technology is going to be a huge part of everyone's futures.
Brittany, it's been absolutely wonderful having your input today and hearing about Qflow's story. For anyone that wants to find out more, can you give a final plug perhaps for your website and where to go for more information?
Yeah, sure. So if you want to find out about QualisFlow, so the full trading name is qualisflow.com. You can find us online. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm just Brittany Harris on LinkedIn, and I'll pop up pretty early on in your lists. I'm a civil engineer, so you can't miss me. And I'm more than happy to talk you through what we've been doing and how we might be able to benefit your developments.
So that was Brittany Harris from Qflow, and I should say any of these young companies that you'd like to get in touch with, where you can see opportunities on your schemes to put their technologies into practice, do get back in touch with us after the programme, and we can help make those connections. Now, I think we have Nick from WSP back with us. His link is in place. So whilst it's working, it would be great to hear your reflections on that local authority developer interface, Nick, and how that can be made to work best for green construction requirements.
Works in various things. I mean, the key thing that WSP and Indigo and the industry work in early engagement, and a lot of that work we're doing through actually thought lead the GLA through London councils to identify ways that we can respond to emergency, and that early engagement helps us to start to identify
I can still hear you, Peter. So early conversations you seem to be stressing, and I suppose in an Ealing context, we'd be looking at their sustainability statement, the sort of code for sustainable homes assessment that they talk about for residential dwellings. I think we're going to bring up a slide on screen that summarises some of these requirements. There's also an energy statement and a travel plan for schemes of certain sizes. Councillor Mason, I wonder whether you can give us a flavour of kind of how this works from your perspective.
Yeah, so in terms of, people involved in the planning industry were kind of well accustomed to the types of expectations that are on them in terms of the evidence basis and the documentation that they're expected.
Peter, I think we're going to have to bring you back in. Sorry, you're good where I am, but yeah. I'm not sure you're going to air. So Joel, in the studio, can you just double check that we've got Peter going live and bring him on screen? Okay, you're ready to go.
Have you got me?
Peter.
Have you got me?
We've got you.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. So the planning industry will be kind of really familiar with the expectations that are on them in terms of what they need to provide to councils in order that we can kind of process their consents. And those the standards that you've got effectively up on the screen, whether it's BREEAM, the travel plans, energy statements, are all part of that planning architecture. And I think it comes back to the point that I was making earlier on in terms of the fact that that architecture is now changing. We have a draft London plan that has been inspected, has been adopted. Controversially, the Secretary of State before coronavirus directed the Mayor to make a series of changes to that London plan, none of which actually involved the sustainability approaches that are contained within it. So, those standards now exist. And likewise, we will be, as a council, reviewing our local plan and starting that process within the next 6 months. To really, really drill down on some of those important aspects and making sure that we set the standard and the expectation that we want from the development industry.
And presumably, if a developer brings forward Passivhaus solutions and that's delivering net zero, you don't mind too much what the label is. It doesn't have to be BREEAM. It's the result that matters.
Yeah, absolutely, and as was said earlier on, there are different labels and different standards that exist within this in this arena, but all of that is fundamentally about a commitment to zero carbon. As I say, look, there are some bigger challenges in the planning and development world, which mean that that our ability to deliver the type of sustainable development that I think people imagine is quite constrained. But where we have the ability to set standards through different forms, then that's exactly what we'll do.
Now, I think we're going to turn to another of the interviews that have happened this week, and we're going to hear the story of Airex from Tim Roebuck.
Thanks. So Airex is a CleanTech product that is effectively designed to save on utility costs for residents. The product itself is a retrofit replacement of existing air bricks. So properties that are fundamentally have been built pre-1940, but in some cases some new builds as well, where there's natural air ventilation where the air bricks occur. The product is designed to effectively control the temperature of the air that flows underneath the floorboards, so suspended floorboards, and it's proven that in some respects to save around about £180 per year per property, on the basis that the air bricks themselves represent around about a 15% heat loss. So if you're able to control the amount of airflow that passes through the natural air vent, and by closing that off, effectively you are able to use less energy when heating your property.
So Tim, who would you say is the sort of ideal customer for your product?
At this moment in time, social landlords, where they may have a large number of associated properties. The product itself is, and again, effectively designed to save on heating. So in some instances, there may be where people are struggling to pay their current utility bills. the product can effectively save on utility savings. And in some cases as well, through our research, we've identified that certainly in social housing cases, some residents will block their air bricks. So what will happen is effectively through the lack of air flow through the property will start to suffer from damp and condensation buildup, so significant costs. But at the same time, the product is designed for anybody that is looking to reduce their energy bills across their property. Our technology is effectively a smart system, so it can also integrate with your heating control systems. So as a passive smart ventilation control, it can actually work in collaboration with your heating controls. So effectively, additional savings can be made as well at the same time.
Goodness, Tim, I live in a 1920s property and you're tempting me to install one. But if I was a social housing organisation installing this at scale, what sort of impact might I see?
In terms of the savings, and I've just got a few here. So in terms of the savings on a particular property, you're looking in the region of around about £180. The CO2 savings, so from the utility savings, you can convert it into carbon. So typically in like a 3-bedroom pre-1940s property, you're looking at around about savings of 10.1 on carbon. But interestingly, and one of the main benefits for social landlords is the fact that we're capturing data because our AirX units are connected to the residence Wi-Fi. So that data is being replayed back to the social landlord. So if you take, for example, a social landlord that may have 10,000 properties within its portfolio, our AirX system is able to capture the data independently of those properties and then replay that back as a group. So what you're able to do is firstly be able to calculate collective carbon savings, but also, and probably most interestingly, is the data that's coming back is looking at condensation and damp buildup, so humidity levels within the property. So when there are significant problems with, say, for example, damp, the social landlord, from having our technology and receiving information back in real time, can start to then do preventative works on the property. So able to identify where there may be sort of significant problems with damp and mold buildup. And recently there is a large number of disrepair and claims that are taking place through the Homes Act, which has started last year in 2018. So again, being able to sort of proactively invest in our technology to avoid those claims being made in the future.
So that was Tim Roebuck from AirX, and you'll find their contact details at the end of the programme. We'll be bringing up web links on screen for all the businesses that we're featuring today. I'd like to bring my colleague Pim in, who's been tracking questions on YouTube, and I think we have a question for Councillor Mason.
Yes, we do, from Matt Ogden of Community Fibre, who's saying legislation is coming to ensure full fibre is provisioned for in all new builds, but how high on your agenda is it that full fibre reaches all existing properties retrospectively?
I can't hear it.
Oh, so in summary, Councillor Mason, as you didn't hear any of the question from Pim, it was around the lack of fibre coming in at a pace, and I think some of the challenges that we're grappling with today on the show, and I think everyone in this pandemic, perhaps highlights the need for more investment at speed.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to say, as we've all, when we're not on these calls, we're on certainly the council calls tackling coronavirus resilience, and I'm working from home to try and coordinate our efforts around the Ealing Together platform, bringing voluntary community sector organisations together, and absolutely broadband infrastructure at home is one of the key aspects. And you think about empty office buildings in central London that probably have fibre optic connections that are all sitting empty, and where that capacity goes. We obviously have standards and expectations that we have within new build properties because they're easy to supply. I've got a new build property. I have hyper optic broadband, which is absolutely fantastic, but there is a challenge about rolling it out broadly into the community. The government investment in this is, I think, what they call an outside-in strategy, which is that they've prioritised funding to rural communities in order to ensure that there's connectivity fibre optic in those locations first. obviously we're pushing for more resources. But as ever, our ability to be able to upfront cost some of the infrastructure that's required to be able to do things like hyper optic broadband for existing communities is only as limited as what we're able to get from developers from 106 contributions and community infrastructure levy. But
and where there are new providers like Community Fibre, are you a council that's open for business to have conversations about new opportunities?
That's our motto.
Good to hear it. We're going to turn to our last videotape of the day, and this is an interesting one because it starts to move us into the area of post-occupancy energy, and from solar right the way through to smart energy. This company has been going for quite a few years now and working in partnership with a whole range of energy companies, a Power Vault. So we're going to hear what Jack Peck has to say of their story.
Power Vault is a British battery storage manufacturer. We're based here in London. We're now 7 years old as a business, so we manufacture battery storage systems, and we are also a cloud and software platform provider to help customers to store up solar electricity that they're producing themselves, and also cheap electricity from the grid, enabling.
And from what I gather, you're one of the first to be building these sorts of batteries here in the UK.
Yeah, so we are one of the largest British domestic battery manufacturers based here in London. We have our manufacturing facility in London Bridge, and we install batteries all over the UK.
Extraordinary. I don't think many people would think of London Bridge as a manufacturing hub, but that's how the world is changing. I gather you have two different product lines, including one that really kind of focuses in on how to reduce the environmental impacts of the batteries.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have two main products: the Power Vault 3, which is a first life lithium-ion battery system, which is available from 4 kilowatt hours right up to 20 kilowatt hours. It's modular. And also the Power Vault 3 Eco, which uses second life electric vehicle batteries within the storage system.
And if I'm a developer and I install these systems in one of my customers' homes, what's the experience like? How easy and kind of user friendly is it to kind of navigate this sort of combination, maybe of solar on your rooftop and then the sort of battery system tucked away in the corner of a room somewhere?
Sure. So the installation is very straightforward. We can either connect the systems AC as a retrofit to existing solar on somebody's roof, or you can connect the system, the Power Vault DC, on a new build or somebody who's getting solar installed for the first time, and connect the solar direct to the battery.
And am I right, there's then a web app that you can take a look at to kind of understand the kind of energy flow and perhaps what income you're generating from your energy supplier?
Exactly. So for the end customer, you have a portal which enables you to see second by second data from your home. So your solar, your energy consumption from the grid, your battery state of charge, all in one easy to use place, and enabling you to see that historically as well.
It sounds like great fun for sort of any tech geeks and those that have got a kind of keen eye on how much they're spending. I wonder whether finally you can just share a little bit more, I suppose, for the developers and investors that participate in our property lunches, about the sorts of deals that can be done. You know, if you're not just installing the system into a single home, but maybe if you've got dozens or even hundreds of homes that you'd like to see a Power Vault system inside.
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with a number of builders and housing associations already. We sell batteries direct to end customers or through our B2B channels. So for builders who are looking for a more mass market product or project, we will do both, and be delighted to speak to anyone with projects coming up on new builds who are looking to provide a greener alternative to their customers and help their customers to reduce their electricity consumption, to drive costs down, and also to start generating revenues as well from the batteries that we can do through grid services to the local and national network.
So that was Jack Peck of PowerVault, the last of the CleanTech young businesses that we're profiling today. And it's just been reflected on by one of our panellists that I've clearly been dressing down as the week's gone on, but unfortunately I haven't managed to have any of my lunch today. I've just been looking at it. So when the programme comes to an end, I'll be tucking in. But I'm now going to return to the panel for their final reflections as we come towards the top of the hour and the end of the programme. And I think first of all it'd be great to hear your thoughts, Nick, on what the future looks like in this area.
Yes, so I think for me and for the company, the industry, it's all about working collaboratively. It's all about finding solutions together. Looking at how policy can be formulated in the future to make sure it's flexible. Yeah, to make sure it's flexible. And for me, it's about solving these solutions. As I say, working collaboratively is the most important, and not going off into silos and trying to work separately. So collaborative working is key to this.
Thank you, Nick. And I suppose the past few weeks have really brought us together in new ways. But as has been flagged, this broadband issue can no longer be ducked, can it? So across to Paul for your closing thoughts on what next steps and the future could look like in really kind of accelerating this change over the next decade.
Yes, thank you. I think it's what we haven't talked about really in a way, but where we've seen it culturally go, and this notion of political will, I think is very important because it's something for everyone. In the past, we've sort of seen 4 or 5 movements, a sort of conservation of nature type, a sort of defense of our own space, if you like, the NIMBY sort of culture. And then there's a sort of deeper ecology sort of counterculture, it's been, and then we've seen the sort of eco-warrior save the planet type, and we've seen sort of the green politics type. And since then we've then seen in a very broader sense the sort of extinction revolution, our children coming out, as well as the more formalized systems trying to make sense of this and create legislation that requires us to do things, and there will be call outs, I think, by the next generation if the new development is not doing these things, and that will have a very profound influence on value and the people who are then making the decisions about how you build and build for the future. So I think how you create that ownership of the agenda going forward and the sort of that space, both figuratively and literally, if you like, is going to be essential. And I suppose to end on a quote that I quite like, don't ever underestimate the importance you can have, because history has shown us that courage can be contagious and hope can take on a life of its own. And I think we should just grab that and try to do more with what we've got already. And I think
that's a lovely reflection in these times, Paul. So Peter, from a local authority and councillor perspective, what do you think we need to be doing next, so the next decade moves faster than the past decade?
Well, I think the first thing that we've got to do is to acknowledge that COVID-19 has quite literally changed our lives within the space of a few days, and to go from where we have been to effectively an economic shutdown will no doubt have challenges as we start to think about recovery. And it's as important as ever that we have those conversations. Now, already you're starting to see interesting stories of economies that have been shut down, recovering environmentally, and I think it'll be very interesting to see what people's connections to their local communities are as they spend more time in them. Our responsibility as a council and as a planning authority will be to try and facilitate the agenda of sustainability as much as we can, and whether that's working. It's a call to pretty much. We don't have we don't have all the answers, and we don't have the universal truth, and we want to work with our partners to talk about the things that we can do, both in the context of our own house building company, Broadway Living, which will be doing its design guide soon, or when we get to talk about the review of our local plan in the next 6 months. There are some really important topics, and we want to engage people in those conversations.
Thank you, Peter. And I suppose as we've heard today from Paul, cost doesn't have to be a barrier. We've heard from Nick the vital importance of collaborating right the way through the process, and we've heard from all these young technology companies that where there are technical solutions needed, we're very capable of delivering them in London, which is fantastic to see. So, as the hour is up, it really just falls to me now to say a huge thank you to our panel today, for all of you viewing, bearing with us through a few technological niggles as we grapple with bandwidth issues, etc. But Nick Belsten, WSP Indigo, Paul Vick, and Councillor Peter Mason, thank you so much for joining us. Those of you that are going to be doing Skype one-to-ones over the next hour, or indeed the next few days, please enjoy them, and don't hesitate to reach out if there are connections that you've now realised you really want to make, having reviewed the delegates list. Let Pim know, and we can get those one-to-ones set up for you. And of course, join us for our next property lunch. Online or offline, it's always a great place to do business. Thank you.